Chapter 4. Later that morning at school, Oggie was sitting at his desk daydreaming about how great it would have been if he had won the Bake Stuff Name the Bagel contest. He pictured himself strolling into the grocery store and running into one of his classmates. David Corbin, for instance. "Hey, Oggie," David would say. "You sure do have a nice tan." "That's because I just got back from Hawaii," Oggie would tell him. "Oh, that's right. I heard about how you won the contest." Then David would pick up a bag of Raisin-the-Roof bagels, which just happened to be on display nearby. "Are these the ones you named?" he'd ask. Oggie would nod and smile modestly. "That's pretty cool," David would say. "Hey, you don't happen to be free after school today to come over and shoot some hoops with me and the guys, do you?" Oggie would have loved an invitation to play basketball with the guys, but it was about as likely to happen as Donica Perfecto inviting him over to one of her pool parties. David Corbin and his jock buddies had given Oggie the nickname Duck because in gym class, no matter what kind of ball you threw at him, Oggie always ducked. And as for Annika's pool, Oggie had never even seen it, though he had heard kids splashing around in it plenty of times during the summer. Oggie's seat was directly in front of the teacher's desk, so when Mr. Snolinovsky clapped his hands to announce that it was time for the spelling test, Oggie, who was still daydreaming, was so startled he jumped right out of his seat. Unfortunately, he missed it on the way back down and ended up on the floor in a heap. Bethy Hudson, who sat right behind Oggie, rolled her eyes. "Remember, class," Mr. Snolinovsky said, as Oggie picked himself up off the floor and slid back into his seat. "You are to use each spelling word in a sentence, and the sentences must make sense." He gave them 10 minutes to complete the test. The words they had been assigned that week ended in the letters O-U-S. Oggie knew how to spell them all, thanks to his handy-dandy flashcards. When Mr. Snolinovsky told them it was time to put their pencils down, Oggie felt fairly confident that he'd done well on the test. "We're going to try something new today," Mr. Snolinovsky announced. "Instead of marking your test myself, I'm going to ask you to mark one another's work. Please pass your paper up one seat to the person sitting directly in front of you." Bethy Hudson groaned and rolled her big blue eyes again. Oggie didn't hear her, though. He was too busy worrying about what to do with his paper. "No offense, Mr. Snolinovsky, but I don't get it," Oggie said. "You told us that we were supposed to pass our papers to the person sitting right in front of us, right? But how am I supposed to pass my paper to the person sitting right in front of me when there isn't anybody sitting in front of me, except for you? And you're not even sitting there at the moment. You're standing over by the blackboard, scratching your head." "Could you have possibly found a longer, more complicated way of asking that question, Oggie?" Mr. Snolinovsky laughed. "I'm not sure," said Oggie, "but I'll give it a try if you want me to." Mr. Snolinovsky had been kidding, but Oggie didn't get it. He often took things the wrong way. Either that or he was saying something he shouldn't, like the time he asked Mr. Siffler if the reason her stomach was so big was because she was expecting triplets. Mrs. Stifler hadn't been too happy about that question since she wasn't even expecting one baby at the time, let alone 3. "If, like Oggie, you happen to be sitting in the front row," Mr. Snolinovsky explained to the class, "I'd like you to get up and quietly take your paper to the person sitting in the last seat in your row." There was a flurry of activity as people passed their papers. Oggie got up and carried his test back to America Johnson, who was the last person sitting in his row. America had a twin sister, Asia, who was in 4th grade class at Truman. Oggie sometimes wondered whether Mr. and Mrs. Johnson were planning to have any more kids, and if so, whether they'd be naming them after continents too. He thought Antarctica Johnson had a nice ring to it. "You get to do mine," Oggie said, handing his paper to America. "Lucky me," said America flatly. He returned to his seat, Bethy's spelling test was sitting on Augie's desk. "The first word is ridiculous," Mr. Snolinovsky began. He slowly spelled the word for them. RIDICULOUS. Oggie didn't even have to look at Bethy's paper to know that she'd spelled the word right. Bethy Hudson had great big front teeth that reminded Oggie of piano keys, and she was the best speller in the class. "Please make sure that the word is spelled correctly and that it has been used properly in a sentence," Mr. Snolinovsky said. "If the person whose paper you are marking has successfully accomplished both of those things, you may place a check mark next to the answer." Bethy had written, "Ridiculous is a ridiculously easy word to spell." Oggie put a big check mark next to Bethy's answer. Mr. Snolinovsky cleared his throat, ready to move on to the next word, when he noticed that America's hand was raised. "Question?" said Mr. Snolinovsky. "What do we do if the person spelled the word right, but the sentence doesn't make any sense?" America asked. Good question, thought Oggie, until it occurred to him that the sentence America was talking about was his. Oggie suddenly felt nervous. He reached for his back pocket, knowing that a little charming would calm him down. The only problem was, Mr. Snolinovsky had a strict rule against food in the classroom. Oggie took his hand out of his pocket and sighed. It looked like he was going to have to face this difficult moment without any help from his cheese.